So, hello everyone. My name is Gabriel Almeida. Just this one. Yeah. My name is Gabriel Almeida, and I've been working in Finland at the University of Vascular as a senior researcher. But as Marta told, I'll be moving to Tromsø very soon to start my own group there. But more about that later on. Today I'll be talking to you about mucosal interactions as a bridge between past and future prophylactic phage therapy. So I hope to make more sense to you about what I mean by this title during the presentation. By starting with phage therapy history, that's something that's very rich and interesting. And probably most of us here know that phage therapy was developed in Paris in the 20s. And then it was used in many places until the 40s or the 50s when it stopped being used because of antibiotics. But of course, it was kept alive in Georgia, Soviet Russia, and also in Poland. And nowadays, we've seen all this revival of phage therapy and how important it is for human health. But something that always interested me is what has happened with phage therapy in the golden years. So when the Hill published his first papers and people start using different places, so different hands, different countries, different ways of thinking start to use phages at the same time for decades. And a lot what has been done in this time is lost or at least forgotten. And with this mindset, we start to look for what has happened in South America. And I was lucky to be able to uncover a lot what was happening in phage therapy in Brazil in the 20s to the 50s. So Brazil is my home country, so that's why I focused there and could uncover a lot of things. And we got a lot of information about what has happened there. And we believe that there's also a lot of things forgotten in other countries as well that we don't know about. I won't be going to the details about what has happened in Brazil, but just to let you know that phage therapy has been big there from the 20s to the 50s. Here you can see some advertisements of phage-based products which were sold in Brazilian pharmacies at the time. And why do I think that's very important? First of all, the historical relevance. And here I beg you, if you can, please check your own country historical records, because you might find a lot of interesting things that has been done elsewhere that we don't know about nowadays. And we start to fill the gaps of phage use between the hair discovery and then the arrival of the antibiotic age. But knowing about that is not important only for the historical part, but also for the applied part. Because if you think about it, we have decades of experience in phage use. So clinical cases, experiments, protocols from the past, that if you get to know them today in better details, we can improve upon them. Because we have better technology nowadays, we have better regulations, so we can do a lot on what has been done in the past and improve what has happened. So regarding the Brazilian side of the story, I will stop talking about that now. And if you're more interested about this, you can read our historical review, which was published last year. And we also have this behind the paper publication. But now I'm going to focus on one specific paper that I found while I was reading these Brazilian papers that led me to think about prophylactic phage therapy. This paper was published in 1950 by Irene Lipska. And it's already a very interesting story because Irene is from Poland. She's well known in Poland for her phage therapy efforts. But somehow she ended up publishing a note in a Brazilian journal in Portuguese for the Brazilian doctors. And on this note, she speaks a lot about microbiomes and how the human babies colonized by her mother microbiome. So she knew a lot about that already in the 50s. And then she describes what Poland was going through at the time when it was occupied by Germans. So doctors stopped having access to medicine and also to antibiotics. So a lot of dysentery outbreaks started to happen in Poland. A lot of babies were dying because of that. And Irene, then she thought about all this theory about the colonization and thought that if she gave the phage first to the baby, maybe the phage would stay inside the baby and protect the baby from the infection. So she and the doctors that worked with her started to test that before with their own children, and they saw that there were no side effects of drinking phages at small ages. And then they started to use that more broadly in Poland to treat newborns. And what they saw very quickly is that phage prevention was helping to stop epidemics and also to prevent baby death at the time. So she finished this note saying that Poland at the time started to give phages as the first liquid after birth to babies. And then she concludes recommending that Brazilian doctors should pursue such a simple and harmless prophylactic means of protecting infants from disease. And I found that very, very interesting, a very good idea. And I started to read more about phage-based prophylaxis. And then I ended up discovering that the Soviet Union has done also a lot of tests about that. And here, here's just a few examples. And I must say that this slide has been provided kindly by Dr. Nina from the Rav Institute. And she has an amazing book about these old Soviet trials. So if you are interested in that please search for this book. She has been responsible for translating a lot of them to English. And about this prophylactic use in Russia, it was called phaging, a nice name, I think. And they did some very big trials. So for example, this one, they included 207,000 people on the trial. There's one that they're even using towns as the experimental unity. So they have phage-treated towns and control towns. And then they could compare what was happening. And if you take in all these Soviet tests into account and gather them, the main idea is that usually phages stays within us for a few days. So if you drink some phages or use it somehow, you won't be losing the phages for a few days. And then in groups of people or towns treated with phages, you tend to have less bacterial disease that the phages could be protected. So there's definitely something happening here. And thinking about why prophylaxis is not better pursued today, I thought that's because of lack of mechanism. Because if we cannot explain why prophylaxis works, we cannot justify its use and we cannot improve upon it. But I think that later we might have the answer lying around the literature. And this answer for me is based on the bacteriophage adherence to mucus model, the BAN model, described by Jeremy Barr in 2013. And this model basically it proposes that exists a symbiosis between some phages and some metazoans. And the symbiosis is based on the principle that the metazoan has the mucosal layers. Some phages can stick to the mucus and stay on the mucosal layer for a few days. And while there, they have more chances of finding their own hosts because their hosts are the bacteria which causes mucosal diseases. So the animal, it provides a mucosal layer where the phage can sit and wait for the host. And the phage kills the host, protecting the animal, which gives the mucosal layer. So that's why it's a symbiosis. And I was very lucky that these papers, they came out right before I came to Finland to start to work with phages and phage therapy. So everything that I have done here has been heavily biased toward mucosal interactions. And our contributions to the field has been showing if the BAN model is important in real infection situations. And spoiler alert here, it is. They are very important. Here is our main paper about the subject, if you're interested in reading about that. And we'll be using rainbow trouts and Phylobacterium colonari as main models mostly. And how we could show that? We did by first seeing that many phages are held by mucins. So not only T4, as Jeremy Barr has shown before, but many other phages, even though some are not. So we have these different groups of phages, some that bind to mucus, some that don't. And we saw that that happens also in vivo. So on this experiment here, we had aquarium with rainbow trouts, and then we gave a phage dose at the beginning of the experiment, at time 0. And then we measure phage titers in the water, the open circles, and in the fish mucus, the black triangles, over 1 week. And just to note that in this case here, we had a flow-through system. So the water was being going through all the time, like almost 1 liter per minute. And even so, you can see that you can find phages consistently on the fish mucus, but not on the water. So that means that mucus is really holding these phages, even 1 week after one single addition of them. Then we proceed to show that if you give phages beforehand, you can protect fish from a little dose of the bacterium, can be 1, 3, or even 7 days, depending on the experiments. The fish gets some sort of protection. The fish gets some sort of protection, sorry. And we went a little bit further, and we ended up showing that mucin exposure increases our bacterium colonari virulence. That's something that was expected, and there's a lot of descriptions of other bacteria that also has virulence improved by mucin presence. But what we saw that was very interesting and new was that if you expose the bacteria to mucins or mucus, the phage can infect better this bacteria. So here you have some examples of our FCL2 phage, which has been exposed either to primary mucus or to purified mucins. And what happens is that in low concentrations or no addition of mucus of mucins, the phage grows poorly in liquid. But if you give mucus or mucin beforehand, then the phage can grow very well and fast. So that means that the phage is exploiting something related to bacterial virulence upregulated by the mucus to be able to kill that. So gathering this all together, we can say that mucin presence, it can retain mucosa-associated phages for days. Mucin also increases bacterial virulence as expected, but on the other hand, it also increases bacterial susceptibility to mucosa-associated phages. So in a way, phages, which are adapted to mucosal layers, are held in mucus for days, and then they can kill better mucosal invaders. So that not only brings a lot of support to the demand model, but also shows how prevention based on phages might be happening, and how can we exploit them for using prophylactic phage therapy. To keep on that, I must say that one question that we had is that are there more evidences about prophylactic phage therapy in the literature? Of course, we have all those old trials and evidences, but we want to see something more modern. And then there's something, here's just a short collection of papers that we like to read and cite. So two of them just shows that in certain models, if you give phages beforehand, you can protect the animals. And these two here on the top, one is even by Marta. We like to cite a lot because we think that here you might, what we see, models might be happening on these papers as well, which is that bacteria is getting changed by the eukaryotic signals. And then the phage, who is not that good in infecting in lab conditions, they can infect better the bacteria on these conditions. So yes, there's some sort of evidence that we can try to use to support our claims. And we have a lot of unpublished data here showing that this whole thing that the phages stay on the mucus, and then the mucus changes the bacterium, and then the phages affects better the bacteria changed by the mucus, happens in other pathogens as well, not only in our Faubacterium columnarum model, including some human pathogens. So we're really confident that this whole mucosal interactions are relevant for many groups of bacterial phages and not only for a few ones. So I want to stop talking about this prophylactic phage therapy with this question. Should we pursue prophylactic phage therapy? And my personal question is yes, we should. So for many reasons. One of them, which I find most important, is that prophylaxis is much better than treatment. So if you can prevent bacterial disease, there'll be a lot of gains regarding morbidity and mortality to public health systems or to animal health or anything like that. So we can gain a lot of society or for food production by preventing and not just treating bacterial infections by the use of phages. And then prevention may also give us better ways of approving phage-based products. And that's because if you think about prevention, the phages are being used as something more like a probiotic and not medicine. And then you can use different ways or different pathways to get approvals, and that might make phage therapy even easier than if you just keep using phages as a curative mean and not just a prevention mean. But I must be very cautious here to give you two information. One is that we need to take care to find suitable phages. So that's because not all phages are adapted to mucosal conditions. So for most of them, you won't be seeing any difference by having mucus or mucin or not or something like that in the cultures. So these phages will not be the best ones to be used as prophylaxis. And in some cases here, you even see some phages that are inhibited by mucin presence. So that's another question, another point to taking care of. We must really try to find these phages which are adapted to mucosal conditions and not use any phage that we have just because we have them. And then we must think about development of phage resistance on the bacteria. That's something that don't worry me that much. Considering how phage resistance works in bacteria, because usually it lowers the bacterial virulence or it goes away very fast. But that's a feedback that I've been hearing a lot from other people from the field, that we must look to phage resistance. And that's because if we start to give phages broadly to help people, to sick people, animals, we might be giving the pressure to the bacteria that they may end up being resistant. And on this subject, I just want to highlight our most recent paper. It's on review yet, but you can find this paper already as a preprint. And on this paper, what we did was to try to follow up our previous one about the mucosal conditions. And we did some long-term experiments. So here, for example, we had the 16 weeks experiment in which we have bacterial phages together. And during 16 weeks, we are measuring a lot of things, including bacterial resistant, phage and bacterial titers, type of resistant, genomes, and so on. And one of the main conclusions for this paper is that over time, if you have conditions with mucin presence, you activate a lot the CRISPR system of the bacteria. So in some conditions, without the mucin, CRISPR is barely activated or not activated at all. But if you have mucin, then the CRISPR is activated. And we think that that's a way that the bacteria has to evade the Bunn model. Because if they are using CRISPR as resistance, that means that they don't have to change their structure, they don't have to change their virulence or anything, so they can still be able to cause disease in animals while being able to evade the phage presence in the mucosas. So that's just to highlight that bacterial resistance to phages might be something relevant to also test in the systems. But anyway, I think that prophylactic phage therapy is very important, that we should look for it. And I see a bright future for this type of approach if we start developing it. I would like to acknowledge people here in Finland that made all this work possible, especially Lotarina Sundberg. She has been a supervisor here for the previous 5 years. And she was a person who let me start to work with phages and get into the phage community. I'm very grateful for that. And also the rest of the lab personnel that has been important for this work, and also our funding agencies. And since I have a few more minutes, I just want to go back to that we were speaking in the beginning about that I'm leaving Vascular to start a position in Tromsø very soon. In 20 days or so, I'll be there. So still preparing the move. But there are going to be an assistant professor at the Marine Bioprospecting Group of the Center for New and Bacterial Strategies of the Arctic University of Norway. And I'm talking about that here because I'll be opening very soon, in a month or so, one fully funded PhD position and also a 3 years long postdoc position. So if you're interested in phages, in phage therapy, in prophylactic phage therapy, or even in viral diversity in the Arctic Sea, please keep an eye for these positions and apply, because I really want some good people working there with me to start my group. And here you have my contacts if you want to write some informal inquiries or just follow to see when the positions are open. So thank you for your attention. I can answer the questions now, and I'm also going to be around if you have something to discuss in the chat afterwards. So thank you again.